Okay, welcome back to ANZPAC. We're coming to you live from Brisbane in Queensland. And today I'm joined by Inspector Corey Allen. Corey, we met back in 2016. I think you actually did a TED talk about some of the work you did with homeless or engaging homeless people here on the streets of Brisbane. And I thought you were 21, but I realised that you joined Queensland Police Service in 1986.
Yeah, 38 years so far.
Yeah, and you've done some time on the streets here in some of the city beats. You've done time in tactical, but also you spent time in the training facility at Waco.
Yeah,
And I saw that you've had some. You're probably not going to like me highlighting this, but you've had some commendations for the work you did in de-escalation as some of your recruits, getting police to engage with empathy and communication rather than tactical with weapons.
mm,
Um, we're here for a different topic here today, talking about the Australia-New Zealand Parental Alienation Conference. Can I start, Corey, by asking you, what is the police department's role in complex family dynamics we've been talking about here?
it's been odd. Like you said, I started in 1986 to see the police's role shift and creep. We just had this massive 100-day review um, conducted by some very experienced senior police that have acknowledged that police have crept into all these types of spaces where the police are the right people to be dealing with complex family issues and case managing complex things. Like some of the evidence we're seeing now is that um, the demands on police generally, the call for service, the crime, the other demands for high-end mental health jobs and attending complex family situations are outstripping our capability. Yet we expect frontline police to be able to go in to see a snapshot of someone's life in a very small window and somehow make decisions that have big ramifications in that small window that make it better. Like I'll be the first one to say we don't always get it right. But I do think we start off with the intention as I want to try and make things better when they're here. But at the moment, it's very odd that it's been acknowledged that we've crept into this area and it's been a bit of a mission creep for us because we've got newsflash where frontline police can't do everything that we ask them to do. Like where you think about it, 1 minute they're walking the beat in the city and they've got to deal with a young homeless kid and they've done all that work with homelessness. They've got to be a different type of person. Next minute, there's someone violent outside a hotel, they've got to be a public order police. So the next minute, they're the first response to terrorism. So if someone's got a knife walking through the mall and they start firing and, causing harm, they're the response to that as well. Then do we expect them to also be, or are you going to have to holistically investigate this complex family situation that could have been evolving over decades? We're asking a lot of our frontline police, and the future direction is around let police do what they're really good at. We're good at going, making things safe, keeping people safe,
Yeah.
and then let's make the introduction to the people that can really get into what's actually going on, who needs protection, who needs help, who needs support.
So that's a massive eye opener straight away. I'm just thinking of an officer that's come from a fatality or a roadside accident straight to a domestic situation that could be a civil matter or we don't know the background. Um,
Mm.
you're you're an inspector for Brisbane North. Roughly how many officers would be under your command?
180 police in look after in a West Patrol group, so it's Inverpilly, the Gap, Painted Grove, and Albany Creek. It's a good area, but like everywhere else, the focus of our work is strongly on the corporate service, basically domestic violence, domestic family violence. Um, we're seeing all police intervene in high-end mental health because there's no one else to go. So police going to stop people killing themselves. And you've got young coppers there with not much experience who are doing a fantastic job at talking to people and, saving their lives. Um, Youth crime, property crime, road owners, road tolling Queensland's heading in the wrong direction. So we have obligations for that. And they're spread over 488 square kilometres in that part of Brisbane. And I'll be upfront, it's a great area. Crime is very good. Community is very supportive. And we're doing much better than other places. But even then, demand is heavily outstripping our capability to respond.
So we're talking today about these complex family dynamics in amongst all of that your officers are dealing with. How do your officers on the front line deal with complex family dynamics, particularly when there's children involved?
there's obligations when police are called to investigate something that's reported as a domestic violence incident, and we obviously are compelled, they give us responsibilities and powers to enter places, talk to people, and do things when we're investigating, and we're compelled to conduct an investigation. The issue is that when the police have got 4 or 5 domestic violence to have to attend to in a day, how complex and thorough an investigation can you do when your window is this big? Um, we've got lots of really good systems and processes. We're getting better at least understanding the dynamics of everyone involved, including children. So if a child's present or exposed to domestic and family violence, a child harm report has to go in, and that also gets reviewed and investigated. So I'll be honest that I don't think police can always do the best job at the scene, but generally their intention is good. Just think, I need to stop whatever bad's happening right now using the tools I have right now. What gives me great confidence is that the next day and every day, there are reviews of what the police did to see if we've done the right thing based on what we know. And there's more holistic review of the whole everything we can know. And we probably don't know everything about the people and the children and everyone involved in that situation. So, for example, there's a gender-centered review that's really diligently done. It's driven by a dashboard, so an officer in charge will have to bring up all the domestic violence incidents that were reported and handled by police. That's even ones we've said are no domestic violence or domestic violence other, or we take an application or a breach, and they'll have to determine whether the police actions based on the base or are right, particularly in terms of gender. So, for example, if a woman was named as a respondent in a domestic and family violence order, we would review that because often women are named as respondents in orders sometimes when they act defensively to violence that's pre-existing. Because remember, we're seeing this much.
Yeah.
And then, I'll be honest, police themselves have their own biases and their own experiences and their own um, point of view to blend with those things. So it gives me great comfort to know that the senior people at the station will look through those matters. The vulnerable persons unit, which is a unit that's in most police districts now, has a team of people that are connected with support and people that can actually case manage. And the higher level ones will go to them to assist with the case management. But I know that when children are involved, it does raise obligations and flags and other things that we have to consider, particularly when we know. And it's not the time to do open heart surgery in public, but I grew up just outside of Brisbane. There was a lot of violence in my house. The police came around quite often, and you can imagine in those days there was no domestic violence law. There were no other things to do. They would really just get my dad to stay somewhere else. Sometimes they'll give him a good clip around the ear. I remember watching him at the footpath, and then Dad will be back next week, and he'll be back drinking, and we're back, and the cycle it was. No one ever went and dug into what's going on with that family. How can we support? How can we support that man to understand that my dad was an alcoholic and he was responding to other triggers from my mother based on the fact that she was a victim of violence and trauma when she was younger.
Yeah.
So there was responsibility, and I'm going to really not try to use the word blame, but there was, even back then, there was no willingness or knowledge or education to go, let's look at what's actually going on for that family. Because whilst an order might say this person's in the most person in need of protection, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a part to play in making things better, as much as, you know, when we talk about it, I'm not going to say men are always the respondents, but men are most likely to be the respondents. That there's a role for men in what can I do and what help can I get so that I don't add fuel to the fire that is a dysfunctional relationship or it is a difficult family relationship. Because as a young kid, I never thought I was probably affected by that stuff. But as I got older, I realized that it did shape a lot of my behaviors, thinking, oh shit, my mum could leave at any moment because of this horrible thing. Because at one time she did take off for a couple of weeks and I had no idea where she was and I thought we'd been abandoned. Or, mum was a pretty aggressive and violent young man. Um, Probably because that's what I saw my dad and how he behaved. But on the good side, I didn't drink much. Probably because I watched my dad drink too much. And I think about the mistakes my dad made and the mistakes my family made, and I try to do better in my family reflecting on that as a grown man.
And I've seen that in your professional career as well, where maybe you've taken some of that into work that you've done within the police force to work on communication, empathy, and engaging people so that we don't have escalation.
Yeah,
Is that,
powerful stuff.
yeah,
You're just saying the right thing the right way, the right place, um, makes a massive difference. And I don't think, I don't want to sound trite, but police are not going to solve every person's problem in the window we had with them. But if you can at least listen to people, they can feel like they were heard. They can feel like you showed them some genuine empathy. Sometimes that's enough to make things a little bit better than when you even if they don't get a good outcome. So it's a silly example, but I just did a big project about talking to people on the side of the road before they drove up Mount Glorious. We structured the conversation with the university. We spoke to 5,500 people, and we just gave police a script, which really it's not rocket science. It's just introduce yourself, have a good tone, tell people why you stopped them, give them a bit of information. The worst job a police officer can have is telling someone that they've been injured in a serious crash. Could I ask you just to drive safely for me today? I would really appreciate it. And thanks for doing the right thing. And thanks for your time. And we discovered that when police speak that way to people at the right time, without writing a ticket, without taking their license, without all that stuff, people slow down, the crash is reduced, all that stuff. So I just think those elements of being heard, being genuine in your interaction, the perception of police will go up. That person might end up still getting a ticket or might end up still doing stuff, but they were treated with respect. They heard, they shown some empathy, and a different thing went in a better direction just because of the way police didn't make people go up by being rude or officious or obnoxious.
I want to ask you a question on the family front with that in a moment, but just acknowledging to our audience online, if you do want to put through a comment or a question, please use the link in the chat. And for our audience here in Brisbane, please use the QR codes. Corey, we've had a comment in the middle of what we've just been saying already from a professional in New Zealand saying, thank you, Corey, for being here today and speaking with us. It's refreshing to hear directly from and interact with a professional at the cold base. And you just give us an insight to what it might be like for police attending meetings. On the back of that comment and what you just said, we take that script, and I used to run my motorbike up Mount Glorious. I totally understand them and framing before they go. What needs to change, whether it's at a systematic level or in the community, around these complex family dynamics that your officers are often being called into for welfare checks or whether it's to do their call out? Generally speaking, what do you think needs to change across the department or community? I'll say community at large.
There's definitely a better generational understanding of what's actually going on compared to what it's been years ago. We've had a lot of education and training, and we've had a lot of stuff. Honestly, the volume of domestic violence training that was jammed into police has been extraordinary over the last 5 years, and I don't know if that's been the most effective thing that we've done, but what has been really effective is generationally we've got younger police that seem to get this because they've been brought up differently. What really needs to change for us is that we can't expect police to be able to understand everything that's happened in your life up to this point, really, in that relationship in this tiny little window. Like we're the best people to go there and think, geez, this is a violent situation. We need to make it safe, and we need to connect people to the right people so they can dig down and think, what can we do for everybody? What can we do for that child? What can we do? What can we do for the dog that's involved that's only had this under? What can we do for the every party in that to make sure that there's less fuel on the fire, and that even if it is a difficult family relationship that's breaking down, that's done so that no one ends up being harmed or harming themselves any more than they should. Like, we have now aggressive control legislation, which was always part of domestic family violence considerations. But police are really tuning into the fact that is this a domestic and family violence situation, or is it just a difficult relationship breakdown where people are trying to understand, well, I think this is domestic violence, or I think this is coercive control. So we are getting much better at going, you just have a difficult family breakdown, it's not going to be nice. And it is difficult and it does feel awful, but that's not domestic violence or coercive control. We're also getting better at knowing when someone is using the system on both sides to do harm, because everyone has an opportunity to do harm. Someone can order a lot of welfare checks just to piss someone off and we push their buttons, but we can tell when that's happening. Um, and police are getting much better at saying, okay, well, that's a pattern now that's not genuine, and the reports from those welfare checks are saying. So when we do that holistic review, we can see that I see this is not someone genuinely concerned about the welfare now. This is someone using us as a weapon to go and say, I can still, poke and prod you and get a reaction. As much as we see people abusing the process of a family law court system by getting adjournments or other stuff and manipulating the system to we see it. We don't have a great role in the family law court things, but these are things that have popped up during the coercive control training and the coercive control stuff to say that, using a system against a person in a way the system wasn't meant to be used is a form of can be considered a form of coercive control. Any system. We are getting better at seeing that. I think what really needs to change is that it shouldn't be the police's responsibility to case manage all those things like we currently try to do, because there are better people to do it. And there are people who, you know, have more headspace and time in their day to do it professionally. I would much rather see us make safe, make the introductions, compel people to take the help that we're giving them and the help that we're offering them in some way, and then for people to go places and to see people that are professional, that are counselors, that are supporters. And I know this will sound male focused, but there's not a lot of support for men. Even if men are perpetrators and they're using violence and even if their behaviour's been horrible, if we're not supporting that person to change behaviour and supporting that person as well, then we're missing out on a large opportunity there to help people get through. I kind of think my dad knew he was committing domestic violence. I don't think my dad understood that, but there was nothing for him apart from when he went to AA that really shifted his behaviour. There was no support for a man to go, okay, perpetrator programs are one thing, but they're a tiny sliver of the support that's out there. How do you help decent men get through a difficult family breakdown and come out the other side, intact and functional? There's not a lot of support for that.
And I consider we're getting comments coming through. We've got people in the live audience and online that are tapping into like the dads in distress type peer support because they're saying there's nothing available.
Very
So, Corey, I want to pull this back down to practical. We've got professionals in the audience. We have lawyers, we've got psychologists, social workers, we've got parents who have been affected by some of these adverse family law situations. Any tips on what our attendees can do, practical things that we can do, particularly when police do become involved?
Sure. So, we've had some training recently, and it was interesting because they gave examples of male behaviour, particularly around coercive control, that comes across as a trigger. So, if police are called and then police attend, um, there's almost like a temptation to, oh, I've seen men in these situations uh, engage heavily with the police and try to change what's happening right there, right now. My best advice is that don't put yourself in a position where your behaviour is going to be judged in the context of what's happening. If you think that, let's say, the police come to an address and you think it's going down the path of domestic and family violence, I would create some space between you and what's happening and make sure that you get voice as well. Because the police are trained also to separate down your different parties and they'll do it. But generally, when I've seen these things go the wrong direction, it's that either side have had a larger piece of it of the time and the hearing. So if you can't control what's happening there right now, and we all want to, I think there is a male tendency to get into, I want to fix this because it's not right. That's not exactly what happened. so that it comes across that you're trying to now control a police response to this, to where I do it, then step back, um, keep good notes, make sure you have voice, get your side of the story and your side of what happened over in the right way at the right time. And even if, and I don't want to sound pessimistic, even if you don't get the outcome that you think you should have got at the time, don't put yourself in a position where you make it worse, by reacting and letting it trigger you into either, your mental state, your how you appear, or whether you're going to appear aggressive or violent because something happened and that wasn't what should have happened. I'm not going to say you've got to take stuff on the chin and just deal with it, but just act with a bit of self-preservation and think, I don't think this is what happened. I feel that I haven't been heard. Try and get yourself heard, but then look after yourself and make sure that you are as healthy and as functional as you can be while you traverse this difficult terrain, because there will be things that happen that maybe they don't seem fair to you, maybe they seem hurtful to you, maybe you're not being able to see your children for a while. The best thing you can do right then is make sure you have voice representation, separate yourself from things that are triggers, and do something for yourself with your mental health and physical health. So we often neglect ourselves because we think, okay, I can't do that because I'm not this. But at all that time, maybe that's the time you should be able to put yourself first a little bit and go, okay, I'm going to actually make sure I'm the best human I can be right now. And be open to the fact that you might be part of the problem. You might not feel like you're all the problem. You might not see the part you play. Maybe there's someone you could talk to say, this is what's happening. And then maybe there's room for self reflection there while you're in that, if you can get yourself in that healthy headspace. And even if you are the person who gets named on an order and you feel like it's all being pointed at you, what can you do yourself to make sure that you're not in that situation again? You know, a short story, and it's stick with the connection. I don't think I was the best police officer as a younger bloke. I was really direct. I was quite officious. I made a lot of arrests. We wrestled and fought a lot of people. It wasn't until I started reporting everything that I did and listening to it, because I got a lot of complaints, and I thought, this is rubbish. Like, I'm a great cop. I arrest 250 people a year in the riots, squad, and I'm always out front leading the charge. And I realized I was part of the issue. I was acting lawfully and I was doing what I thought the right thing was. But when I listened to my recordings and I thought, no, I think I'm part of the problem here. I don't think I was the problem, but I was definitely part of it. And I can control that. So if I revised the way I spoke to people, I haven't had a complaint since. And
Interesting.
I've had just that self reflection part for me, which was difficult because I thought I was, God's gift to believe at that point. The adventures, I was actually vicious with people. I was direct. I didn't listen to them. I just certainly didn't show them any empathy. I was like, I just want to know what offence you've committed. And if you're going to push me down that path, that's great, because, I'll arrest you and there'll be 3 more charges. When I started to change that, because I took the opportunity to self-reflect, things did get better. And that was the bit I could control.
Yeah.
So I suppose the thing is, in all these situations where if it's not going the right direction, there's things you can't control. Things you can control is what you bring to it. Don't bring fuel to add on the fire. Look after your well-being and your own health. If you can help someone else going through this peer support, I think it's very powerful. And maybe then, those are the things you can control right now. Maybe that's the time to focus on that.
I'm seeing comments rushing through saying, thank you for your candor. Thank you for your honesty, because that's just given a whole different light to what it's like on one of the parties, which sometimes is police, and dealing with these matters. Thank you for your openness and your honesty, Corey. We're going to jump in the hot seat now and take some live questions from our online audience and audience here in the room.
It was funny because he asked me, she said, "Oh, you're going to ask the difficult questions?" I thought, well, I actually work for the public, so if you had an opportunity to ask an awkward question to a police officer, it should be entitled to do that. So
Well, let's see how we go. We have a professional here in Australia online who's part of our online audience, who said previously Parents Beyond Breakup showed a link between parental alienation and historical family domestic violence with 90% male victims. Why is historical and escalating in FGB often ignored, particularly towards men?
I suppose the understanding of violence at the moment is largely driven by the obvious and overt harm. So, my wife was the domestic and family violence high risk team manager for Brisbane, and we had some really frank conversations about these sorts of things. The focus has really been on intimate partner homicide and the things that lead to that. And you can't deny the fact that domestic and family violence is a gendered issue. More women die at the hands of men than men die at the hands of women. That doesn't mean that men experience violence in different ways that are not physical violence, that are not things. I just don't think we've probably got a full appreciation of this whole difficult family situation and difficult relationship situation, what other parties bring to the situation and the harms that happen to everyone involved there, because their focus is being heavily on people that die and largely women that die at the hands of their partners. So I just think also take in mind that when police take out a domestic and family violence order, person may have been suffering some form of domestic and family violence, but the order is taken out for the person most in need of protection. And that sometimes, or almost always, is the most vulnerable person in that relationship who has the least amount of power. And that could be physically, emotionally, and all the other things. And it's most often perceived as that's the person who needs the most protection at that point. So I don't want to talk about my family situation. Um, Mum did not help the situation that happened in our family. She was a very manipulative and game playing person that used to play people up in the house, and she was, she had her own reasons. She was a childhood victim of sexual violence. She had all these things that she was. It was terrible. My dad was a violent person, and he was very violent. He broke a nose, threw it upstairs. The police were around all the time, and he would drink a bottle of rum. And he tells me when he recuperated, he told me there were years there he didn't even remember what he did. He was that guy. I agree. My mum was the most person in most need of protection, but she was her behaviour and reaction and that dynamic was a factor. If there was an order to be taken out, my dad was the person to have the order taken out again. But that doesn't mean that this other person shouldn't have got help and support and all this stuff for what she was bringing to the relationship as much as what my father was bringing to the relationship. It's just that if you had to say that needs to stop right now, it's the violence and the physical violence. I think a better assessment of what does this whole relationship need to make it better, if it's going to continue, because often people, and my mum stayed in those relationships regardless of how much violence was put against her, and she continued to push the button to make things worse. And I still don't understand why she would do that, but I can see where it comes from. But we need to look at what has this person bring that contribute to the harm? What does this person bring that contributes to the harm? And an order that says this person can't do that and this person will done anything doesn't really do that. More complex than an order. The order is a treatment to stop something from happening, I believe it, but that changes behaviour slightly, but it needs to be more than that.
So another interesting perspective. We've got a comment here from an individual here in Australia. So I think this is a parent. Okay, false allegations led to a police DBO and severing of contact with my kids. It's never been reversible, and now I'm feeling alienated. My children and I are victim of police being weaponized. So you mentioned before that police can often see where someone's using the system.
Mm.
And I'm betting a lot of your officers, parents themselves, who may have even been through separation, some of these relationship struggles.
Police are quite vulnerable to that because the impact on police and military and other people is that if you had a DV order, you get your weapon taken off you and you're idling for 5 years. So the police obviously have their own experience, and police commit DV as well and involved in using violence as well. But
That weaponisation, how much do police see that on a daily basis versus how much can they do about it?
oh well, I tell you what, we're really good at recognising it because there's such an obligation to conduct a wider investigation about police are getting better at thinking, well, I know you're saying this happened, but we need to know what actually happened. So there's an obligation on police to go and get versions from other people and do a holistic investigation. It can't just be, okay, if you say that, we're going to take action straight away. And those holistic investigations get reviewed. But we're getting better at understanding how these things work. So when we see someone trying to use us as a tool in getting control or in harming the other person, we're getting much better at picking up on it. My advice to that person is, if you feel like you weren't heard and you feel like things were false, then if you have if you have the energy and the effort and the support, is to use the process and try and go to court, um, and at least be heard, because you may still end up with a domestic and family violence order, but there may be some give and take about, what is the truth of the matter.
Yeah, okay. And interesting, we had a barrister on recently who was saying similar, that if you're not able to get that traction, take it to court and get the process to assist you.
Yeah, the court process is not nice. It's busy. It's not nice for anyone. Um, I don't think it's extremely well administered, but it is one of the only forums where if you show up and you have good intentions and some support, that you can be heard.
Yeah.
Well, I don't, you're not always going to get the exact outcome that you think, but at least you might think, well, at least I was heard and at least my version got across, and I think I was given some respect. And maybe that's enough to get you through a little bit less damage than you were at the start.
Well, look, we didn't know where this conversation was going to go, but it's raw and it's real. And I appreciate your candor. We've got another comment from another one of our online viewers who said, I was advised by a lawyer to accept an AVO without admissions, as courts won't overturn the police issued AVO. But the family court then assumes that I'm guilty because I give the consent without admissions. I've lost access to my kids. How does that play out when you're saying that police need to use what they've got? They only see that snapshot. Does that weigh in on their decision making or reviews in that process?
Oh, it does. And nothing holds police more accountable. And I hear them complain about all the time unless I got another contested TV. And for less, because when we charge people with criminal things, it rarely gets contested and it's a high standard of proof. Like you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. To get a domestic violence order, it's not of that same standard. It's the balance of probabilities, and the person most needed protection. But um, police complain about it because it's a buttload of work to put together a whole brief for domestic violence, a contested domestic violence application. But what? That's part of the business at the moment. We accept it. But that is where you can get a fair hearing, because if there are gaps in the investigation, if there are things that weren't heard, going to hearing for a domestic and family violence application, and they do get overturned, but so police orders will be overturned if the evidence is there. It's just a bloody hard process, and legally represent it can be expensive process, and sometimes people capitulate to it in order just to go, it's a part of the legal resistance. I'm not going to be violent anyway, so I'll just take the order. It's just I can't speak for the family court and the decisions they make and the weight they might put on that, but maybe that's the avenue where say, yes, I did agree to the order because I'm not a violent person. This is what I'm saying and haven't. Just because you do contest an order doesn't mean that you're saying, yes, I'm a violent person.
But even need to acknowledge the difference between the state legislation and federal legislation would appear in two different courts.
Yeah.
But we do see that through the work that we do. So many come through with that. This is an interesting question, Corey. We're obviously we're tapping into something. So this is from another one of our online attendees. Under what circumstances will police intervene in cases where a parent is withholding contact with the children?
It's complex because parents can withhold contact based on they deal with the child, and they can legitimately do it based on that they feel the child could be put in a situation where there's harm. Um, if there's a family law court order that says this is what the arrangements can be, we can get I think it's called a retrieval order or another order, and we can retrieve a child if it's not in compliance with a family law court order. But I can say that doesn't happen very often. Usually,
It's under a recovery order.
Recovery order. It doesn't happen very often. But I've seen people legitimately withhold contact with the child because there's been something happen that says, no, I'm concerned about the child going there because of these things. Honestly, it's got to happen even if sometimes turns out, and I did have a good friend of mine who his children were withheld because it was an allegation of something that was involved with harming the children. It was eventually proved to be untrue, and it was horrible, and it was difficult, and it was awful. But honestly, I do think that still has to happen because we had an obligation to protect the children um, until we. So I know it's probably a bitter pill to swallow, but if it came down to a choice between, well, I'm going to stop the child from going to this place where we think harm might be happening, because I know that people who don't get to see their children, um, but I still think we are compelled to do that because children being harmed is a very real thing. And if we didn't, I'd rather on the side of caution than um, than the alternative, send a child into a potentially harmful situation, you know.
Well, that leads us into, there's a comment from our audience here in the room that is saying police attended my home and my ex-wife tried to remove the child. Police attending agreed on a catch-22 and she's going to pay, but we should look at kids first. What position are police in when they have to deal with someone?
And again, it's like a tiny, it's like looking at a baseball game through a straw. You see this tiny little piece of what's going on in a whole life. And you know what? I review complaints and I review what happens about police, but just be prepared for the fact that police might get it wrong with good intentions, and we're accountable too. So if the wrong thing does happen, my advice is to hold your water, exercise self-restraint, exercise and regulate your own emotions as best you can, look after yourself and get support, and be heard at a time when it's not going to escalate things. So jumping in right then and there, right now, unless you actually have to, I've seen many of those situations escalate where I think if that person had just held their water and said, I agree with this right now, this is not the right thing to happen, I'm going to go and stand over here and I'm going to call my representation or support, and don't add fuel to the fire, you've got a better chance of getting a good hearing when the passion is cooled and when investigation happens, and you require that to happen because the police work for everybody. They don't just work for people that aren't. Look, people I think are blind, people I think need protecting. They work for everybody.
Yeah. Well, it's a lively conversation, and we probably need to wrap up. And I'm going to sneak a couple more because there's a lively engagement both here in the room and online. We've got a question here. If the police know they have made a mistake, and I'm presuming that's from the processes afterwards or whatever, what's the mechanism to correct matters and potentially change that practice?
A commissioned officer has to review or withdraw DV matter. So I regularly withdraw DV matters based on the officer said, listen, we get this, we've taken out this application. Now we've had opportunity to get more information and other things. We think it shouldn't go ahead. They have it regular. Same with doing DD breaches. And not anything DV related. It has to be overviewed by a commissioned officer or can be reviewed, and that happens regularly. So there are processes there, and we do self-recognize, like I felt that wrong. The wrong person's been named as a respondent, or the breach didn't occur as it was alleged at the time, and the evidence we have at the time we charge them, and we'd find out more evidence, we'd find out other things. That's why you're having your say and having voice at a time when it's more likely to be heard and the passion is cool is quite powerful.
Yeah.
Because the police are listening. It's not like the times when we would charge someone with a criminal offence because they're definitely the right person, I've got the right person, and you get this cognitive bias. I mean, I can't possibly consider anything else. We're getting much better at thinking, well, we acted on what we knew at the time, what we thought was the right thing, but we actually got the mechanisms to be wrong and to change things. Now we're much more open to that.
Okay. I'm going to give us one last question. I'm going to sneak in here. This is from one of our audience online. If you ring 000 because of a doctor's directive, is it then reasonable for police to issue a DVO because I'm seen as a risk? I'm being punished for asking for help.
I never understand the context of that one. What do you think?
So it's all we've got there. This person has rung 000, so rung the emergency number, and police are saying to deem him to be at risk. He's feeling like he's being punished for reaching out and asking for help in one of those troubled situations.
Sure. Well, I can only say that if you need help, you're entitled to help, and you shouldn't feel judged or punished because you asked for it. Um, I'm going to make some assumptions. This is talking about someone thinking about self-harming, because there's this whole thing about if you threatening suicide is a way it's sometimes perceived a way of trying to control another person, saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm letting you see my children, or if you don't do this, I'm just going to kill myself." Um, that's different from someone who's in a horrible situation who gets to that place. Um, Regardless of how people might view it, or how people might see it, or how you think it could potentially be used, just ask for the help and deal with that other crap later. A dead father is no good to anybody.
And if I've heard in this time talking, you've mentioned a few times about putting fuel on the fire, about getting the help, but also having voice and having that voice heard.
Yeah, I think that's important because sometimes you feel powerless in life in situations, and it won't always get the exact outcome that you might think you get. But I think humans we're quite prepared to cop something that happens is we don't think's quite right if we think, well, at least my my side or my voice was considered. And I feel like you actually listened to me, and I feel like it was actually considered. I still might not agree with what happens, but I know the harm that comes out of that is way less than when everyone has voice and they get heard. And psychologically you just feel better when you think, "Oh, actually, they didn't change anything." How many times you get back to someone you think, didn't change anything, but I actually feel a bit better talking about it
Yeah, 'cause I got heard.
because I had a coffee with you and sat with my mates, and I'm like, I feel he's better. I'm still in this big pile of poo in my personal life, but I actually feel a bit better. And that costs nothing.
Well, Corey, thank you so much. One, for your time. I know you're coming here whilst you're on duty, but also the personal side. I think you've given us a whole another perspective and your own personal perspective on this. So really thank you for being part of the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
And for our viewers online, we're just going to take a short break. Stay with us because coming up next, we have Evie Morgan, our next guest. We do encourage you to submit your questions and your comments using the QR code or the link that's in the chat. And for the audience here in the room, submit your comments and questions via the QR code. We'll be taking a short break now and we're back with our next guest, Corey. Thanks, mate. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, and thank you.